Okay, welcome back, everyone. It seems like people are just about getting back from the quick break we've had. I'm really pleased to be welcoming Michelle Walker, one of our technical directors here at the Rivers Trust, to chair our next session. I hope Michelle is really pleased to see so much chat about citizen science, in particular in the last session. I'm sure that will be unpacked further in this next session on data-led delivery. So without wanting to delay things any further, thanks so much, Michelle.
Thank you, Becca. Yes, indeed. It's really good to hear a lot about citizen science, and we'll be unpacking that a bit as we go through this session. So I'm just going to give a quick intro for 5 minutes before we bring in our speakers. My name's Michelle Walker. I'm a technical director at the Rivers Trust, and I jointly lead a team of technical data experts who produce things like the CABA data package, the sewage map, Big River Watch, as well as supporting our network of member trusts with a whole range of things like monitoring, mapping, data visualization, modeling, and data analysis, all with the aim of driving river and catchment restoration work. And I'm really delighted to be chairing this session today. Our title is Data-Led Delivery, Where Are We Now? And we've got a great panel of speakers lined up for you today to explore the ways in which data and evidence are really driving and supporting on the ground delivery of river improvements. And as we heard in the last session, our rivers are in very poor health. They're widely polluted by runoff from agriculture, from sewage, from roads, urban areas, but also our river habitats are really fragmented by barriers. They're damaged by straightening, dredging, encroaching development. On top of this, our increasing use of water for domestic, agricultural, and industrial purposes really threatens our rivers with drought, while climate change and population growth are ramping up the pressure and putting more people at risk of flooding. The good news is that we can tackle all of these problems if we work together at scale, taking an integrated catchment-based approach. And that really means targeting our interventions and nature-based solutions really carefully and collaboratively, so that, for example, a wetland that we put in for improving water quality can also reduce flood and drought risk downstream and have a biodiversity and climate change benefit. And to give an idea of the scale of existing delivery, last year alone, the Rivers Trust movement restored or created 472 hectares of wetlands, opening up 175 kilometres of river for fish passage, worked with nearly 3,000 farmers to reduce agricultural pollution, and installed over 1,400 natural flood management measures. So all of these actions need precise targeting so that we make sure we're tackling the most urgent issues first and achieving those multiple benefits. And it's also really important that we record what we're delivering and measure how well our interventions are working so that we can keep adapting our approaches and continue to secure the essential funding. And all of this requires really good data, but our statutory evidence base has been eroded badly over recent years through cuts to government monitoring programmes. So, as we've heard already, communities and citizen scientists, environmental NGOs, and catchment partnerships across the UK are working to fill these gaps and improve the evidence base to drive improvements. And the Cascade project that has been mentioned, that we've been jointly leading with the United Utilities, has been working to ensure that these different sources of evidence can be accessed and used and trusted by decision makers. So in this session, we've got four panelists joining us to share their stories of how data is driving delivery on the ground. First of all, each speaker is giving us a 5-minute lightning talk to outline some of their work. And then we're going to have a panel discussion to explore some of the issues and opportunities. And you'll also have a chance to ask questions at the end. So please do keep posting your questions in the Q&A area. So firstly, we're going to hear from Heather Bell, my colleague at the Rivers Trust, who's going to talk about a national initiative to record delivery of nature-based solutions. After that, we'll have Lucy Hyde from Yorkshire Dales Rivers Trust talking about how they gather and use data and evidence to target and plan their work. And then Dr. Rachel Walker of Barnes Conservation will be talking about baseline monitoring that they've done to measure improvement in the river restoration work they've done in London. And finally, Dr. Sarah Taigel of Norfolk Rivers Trust is going to share how they've been supporting citizen scientists to drive improvements in the River Wensum. So firstly, Heather, if I can invite you to turn on your camera. Heather is a senior technical GIS analyst at the Rivers Trust, and she uses her geographic information systems expertise to support local communities, NGOs, and catchment partnerships to record and share the delivery of nature-based solutions in a standardized national data system. And this enables better tracking of the effectiveness of different types of interventions, helping to improve future management of our rivers and secure funding at scale. So over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, I'm Heather Bell from the Data and Technical team at the Rivers Trust, and today we're going to be talking about the Nature-Based Solutions database and the NBS Hub that we look at this data through. To get started, here are some examples of nature-based solutions that have been mapped. Terminology loves to change and evolve, but what we are talking about when we say nature-based solutions are actions that protect, manage and restore our natural environment. In a catchment, nature-based solutions are often actions such as restoring rivers through the reintroduction of meanders or reconnecting a river to its floodplain. Margins at the edges of rivers can also help clean up water quality and improve habitats. Nature-based solutions can also be things like leaky barriers, shown in this picture, which can be dams or wooden structures, even just dead wood, that are placed into gullies and streams, which slow the flow of water and also improve biodiversity by providing habitats, reducing erosion, and the loss of sediments further downstream. These are just two examples, but there are many more examples of nature-based solutions. In fact, it's quite a large task to categorise them all. Our colleague Gwen has brought together this guide to help. When nature-based solutions are delivered well, they blend into nature. It's both a good thing and a challenge, because to the unexpecting eye, leaky barriers might look like a mess or a problem, and there are examples of them being removed accidentally. So if nature-based solutions do blend in completely, how do we know where they are, recognise their value, take care of them, and plan for the future? This quote from Robert Macfarlane highlights the importance of nature being on the map. Without appearing on a map, it is easier to destroy nature, to be discarded, destroyed, and removed in the real world. It's a large part of the reason why it's so important to have a digital record of all these amazing efforts to restore nature. The thing is, we already know this, and there are lots of different websites and funding-specific portals that have been developed by multiple organisations, each with a different database. But if everyone does it individually, it becomes ineffective to link up the data, build a true picture, and the resources become fragmented. What all these projects have in common is that they are natural assets. People don't want to put their data into multiple places. They want to spend their time on the ground, but we still need a record so that we can use this evidence base to inform policy or show funders the impact. The most efficient and perhaps only way that we can gain this national picture successfully is to reach a standardised model. And this is why we've invested the time into developing a standard data model for nature-based solutions with multiple organisations. It's something we've been working on for nearly 10 years. We've recently trademarked the Nature-Based Solutions database. With one data model, multiple organisations can start to connect the dots at a national scale. If we think of the data model as putting in the plumbing first, this is the most important step. The websites and the platforms for data entry may look flashy and come and go, but we always have the reliable plumbing that makes our data comparable and useful at a national scale. Even if this data is added using different platforms, with this branding, users will know that their data is going into the same plumbing system, a nature-based solutions database, a bit like the Intel badge on a laptop. But we also want to reduce the burden on delivery organisations to record data, and this is why we have built the Nature-Based Solutions Hub. The Nature-Based Solutions Hub is a free, collaborative and publicly visible online mapping system for community groups and organisations. Users can plan, collaborate, add delivery and the maintenance of natural assets through the online platform. And now we have everything in one database or data model, we can start to split it out thematically. For example, the Environment Agency can therefore only see the natural flood management that they'd be interested in for particular projects, or individual organisations can present their local information. The fact that everything is in one standardised format for nature-based solutions means that it can be presented to different audiences, and entering the data once and using it multiple times. If we measure it, we can manage it, and if it's on the map, we can ensure that it stays there in real life too. So thank you, and if you think you would like to use the NBS Hub or learn more about the NBS database, then please get in touch with us. We're always happy to chat to people and help them use it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. And we've posted the link to the hub in the chat if people want to go and have a look after the session. And obviously, if you've got any questions, you can get in touch with us. data@theriverstrust.org or our general inbox address. Okay, next up then, we are going to have a lightning talk from Lucy Hyde, if Lucy can join us. So Lucy is a project officer at Yorkshire Dales Rivers Trust, working on the Sunnow project, which is all about identifying the optimum locations for nature-based solutions to mitigate pressures on the river's swale, Ure, Nid, Ouse and Wharfe. She's working with farmers and landowners across the catchment to develop local proposals, including wetland designs, riparian tree planting, floodplain reconnection, and natural flood management. So, Lucy, please take it away.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I'm Lucy Hyde, working on Yorkshire Rivers Trust solution for the Sunnow project. So the Yorkshire Rivers Trust cover 5 major river catchments, which gives us a very large area, making it quite challenging to decide where we're going to be targeting works to improve river health. So my project was developed to prioritise locations where we can get multiple benefits from river health through nature-based solutions work. So the first part of the project, we worked with Wyde IT worked with Kat McIlwraith and her team at the National Rivers Trust. And Kat's team built us a GIS toolbox in ArcGIS model builder that weighed up a number of data sets and helped us to prioritise nature-based solution work on the ground. So the model brought in a host of geographic data sets, including constraints that limit where we can do work, alongside opportunities for interventions. And the toolbox allowed us to decide a weighting, such as whether we considered each data set to be an essential hard constraint, a moderate constraint, or to have no impact at all. It also brought in modelled information on source of risk to river health that Kat's team had run for us for our catchments. So the toolbox brought all of these data sets together, and there was an adjustable weighting system that allowed us to ask different questions of the outputs, depending on what we're interested in looking at on the ground. So we could prioritise interventions depending on those different objectives we're seeking to meet. For example, I ran 4 major scenarios with the tool, looking at river shading, soil erosion, nutrient pollution, and flood risk. I could then look at the outputs at a catchment level, performing spatial analysis, such as averaging the results by water body to choose which water bodies we should be targeting, or at a site level to provide supporting evidence that nature-based solutions on a location will achieve particular benefits for river health. So as well as using these outputs internally, I also shared the results with partners and local communities, and we've had a number of discussions on how others could use the tool, this ArcGIS tool, to answer different questions and in different catchments. So I've been using that on the next steps of the project to engage with landowners developing nature-based solution proposals. And I'm going to quickly touch on a few of the other ways we're using data for delivery, for nature-based solution delivery on the ground, particularly our shift to adopting more open source tools and using open data. So at the start of the project, I made a template, a GIS template containing a host of open source environmental and geographical data sets for YDRT's catchment. And one of the layers I'm regularly using to help develop projects is the EA LiDAR data, which once downloaded, it's relatively simple for those familiar with QGIS to use plugins to analyze different features such as the slope of a hill or look at flow pathways across the landscape. For example, if we don't want to be putting natural flood management interventions on steep slopes, it could easily highlight areas where the slope, say, less than 6 degrees here. And that helps give a quick guide to where we're placing interventions, although all of these will be backed with ground surveys to make sure that it's realistically possible on the ground. Sometimes openly available data isn't high enough resolution, so we've recently been lucky enough to get another drone as a team funded through the FIPL programme. And although it's a relatively simple drone, there are ways to set up a flight plan so that it can follow a set pathway. And once it's off on that path, you can take images every 5 seconds along that path to get a good coverage of the landscape. And then bring that imagery back once you're at the desk into a free tool such as WebODM, which is free and open source, to process all of the pictures and mesh them together. And with this, we've been able to build detailed ortho mosaics, which give us much higher resolution understanding of the sites than the satellite can give us. And you can also do terrain analysis on that, again at higher resolution than the 1 meter LiDAR in the open data. Another advantage of moving to open source mapping tools such as QGIS is the ability to adapt the tool to our own needs. For example, my colleague Patrick has recently built an excellent plugin that calculates the cost and flood storage volumes based on the area of interventions mapped in the mapping software. So for the site I showed earlier, I can easily run the tool to set my costs from previous experience and then find out that all the scrapes together with the leaky barriers and woodland planting in this proposal would cost approximately £90,000 with the capacity to store 400 metres cubed. And that was a couple of clicks of the button to find out that rather than going through multiple spreadsheets. So I haven't time to touch on other uses, but we're, for example, using Q-Field application in the field for site walkovers, or building an internal map of our active projects to help keep track of what we're doing as we're growing, as well as a long-term interest in potentially a shared server so that we can keep up to date with mapping updates almost instantaneously. And yes, very happy to touch on any more of these topics in more detail in the discussion later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And yeah, covered a lot in a short space of time. It's really a sort of shop window to some of the things that you've been doing. And we've had a request in the chat for sharing the slides afterwards. We'll certainly share the recording so people can go back and have a bit more detailed look, and I'm sure can get in touch if they want to find out more as well. Thank you so much. Okay, if I can now invite Dr. Rachel Walker to join us. So Rachel is a London-based scientist working in conservation research and monitoring for Barnes Conservation. She's really interested in studying the environmental factors and ecological interactions that shape biodiversity within different ecosystems and monitoring the impact of restoration works and conservation management interventions across a range of habitats in urban areas. She's particularly interested in what indicator species such as freshwater insect communities can tell us about the condition of the habitats in our urban areas. And throughout her work, she aims to generate evidence-based research to identify solutions to improve our conservation outcomes. So Rachel, please take it away with your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, my name is Rachel Walker and I work as a conservation scientist at Barnes Conservation, which is a charity based in southwest London. And today I'm going to briefly talk through with you the work we've been doing to restore Beverley Brook, which is a river that runs through southwest London where we're based, and how we are using data to inform the work that we're doing. So well, I'm sure many of you know that urban rivers suffer from a lot of stresses, and Beverley Brook is no exception to this. So it's been heavily modified over the years, you know, deepened, widened, got a lot of concrete kind of edges around the river. We have a lot of invasive species, misconnected outfalls that have polluted water continually coming into the brook. We also have episodic pollution events from partially treated sewage, which is the image on the bottom left. And unfortunately for the Beverley Brook, about 80% of its source water comes from the Hogsmill treatment plant. So there is a lot of constraints about the work that we can do and a lot of pressures. And so essentially there are no natural parts now left of the Beverley Brook. But in 2024, Barnes Conservation received a grant to try to restore a 1.5 kilometre stretch of the river. And the aim was to create a more natural meandering flow and to improve the overall biodiversity. And so we've achieved this using a monitoring framework where we have done a lot of different types of survey to try to get an overall picture of what's going along, what's happening along this stretch of the river. So this includes smart rivers, which scores river health based on freshwater invertebrates, of which most are ID to the species level. Morph rivers, which assesses the physical condition of the river. We also did an assessment of the outfalls as well to score whether they were polluting or not. And we've done water quality sampling as well along this stretch. Electrofishing to look at fish biomass and diversity. Audio moth, which is an acoustic logger that monitors bat activity and diversity. And we've also been doing riverfly for about 8 years now, which is a monthly count of freshwater invertebrates to detect pollution incidents. And so a key part of what we do is to collect really robust baseline data so that we can then look at whether the projects that we're working on have been successful. And the baseline data that we took for this project showed that we had, which is not a great surprise, really high abundance, but low diversity of pollution and stress tolerant freshwater invertebrates. The channel is very highly modified. We recorded 7 raw sewage and utility wastewater misconnected outfalls just in that short stretch. Poor water quality across all metrics, including spikes in chlorine and ammonia. We have inconsistent riverfly scores. So although actually the overall score has improved over time because we get these episodic pollution events, that we get really inconsistent results. And although it's only been a couple of years since this project was done, we have started to take some post-restoration data and look at that. And this showed that there has been a significant increase in abundance of freshwater invertebrates, which is likely to do with the kind of habitats that we've created, but there hasn't been a change in diversity. We have created a much more natural meandering channel along this stretch. So there's been changes in flow speed, increase in exposed gravels for fish spawning. We've also seen an increase in native riparian vegetation because of all the tree works that were done to let light in. But the number of invasive species has increased and they're coming up from the Thames. We've had 1 polluting outfall fixed, which felt like an absolute miracle when that happened. But overall, we haven't seen a change in the water quality. And so I thought I'd show you a couple of photos because it's always really nice to see what happens after these projects have been done. So you can see here that we've put in gravel beds, berms as well, and the light has allowed a lot more of the vegetation to grow along the river banks. And here as well, you can see all the large woody debris that we've added in and how that's changed the flow in the river. And so all of this data informed the decisions that we were making on where to do interventions along this stretch of the brook. But the post-restoration sponsors have been limited. And although, as I said, it is still early days, you know, an increase that you'd hope to see in diversity can take time. But we are really limited by recruitment and dispersal barriers. Beverley Brook is unusual in the respect that it's actually much worse upstream than it is where we are. And we are quite basically downstream at the end where we join the Thames. And so we know that it's going to be a real challenge to increase the diversity of the freshwater invertebrates that we're seeing because they simply can't get here. We're also hugely constrained by the multiple sources of pollution, which is a very difficult problem to tackle, and also the physical urban surroundings as well. If we were to try to reconnect Beverley Brook with the floodplain, we would flood a huge section of London. So that's obviously not an option. And so this means we have to take an adaptive management approach to what we do. We feel like we are limited by the habitat works that we've done now, because we've potentially reached a ceiling with that, where the pollution levels mean that how much more can we possibly achieve? And so we now want to take a catchment-based approach to the Beverley Brook, where we look at what we can do to resolve some of these issues further upstream, in the hope that we will then see the benefits of that from the habitats work that we've done where we're based in Barnes. And so to summarise, Beverley Brook is obviously one of the most stressed rivers. It reflects the huge pressures that face our urban waterways. And there's a small graph at the bottom here, which you don't need to see the details of, but the blue arrow points to where Beverley Brook is. It's 58 out of 60 for the study that Wildfish have done, comparing all of the smart river schemes that have happened nationally. So really there is only one way to go, and that is up. But I hope that I've demonstrated that taking a multi-method, robust scientific monitoring framework can really help inform what practitioners are doing on the ground and to improve conservation outcomes. And if you'd like to find out more about what we do at Barnes Conservation, the QR code will lead you to tell us more about the other projects that we do and the kind of monitoring that we do for those as well. Thank you very much.
Michelle, your sound is a little muffled. So I wonder if maybe
Is that
yeah.
better?
Oh yeah, that is better. Thanks. That's me from introducing Sarah.
No worries. Thanks so much, Rachel. If I can introduce Sarah now for the last of the lightning talks. Dr. Sarah Taigel is a GIS and data analyst at Norfolk Rivers Trust, applying a wide variety of approaches developed during her PhD on applying geospatial technology to catchment management. And her work spans GIS, opportunity mapping, citizen science, and digital innovation. And she's going to talk to us now about some work particularly related to the Cascade project. Thanks, Sarah.
Hopefully that's all showing nicely. Thank you for inviting me along today. And yes, I work at Norfolk Rivers Trust as GIS Data and Evidence. Data Evidence and Research Manager is a new title. I have to get it right. Bit of practice needed. So through the Casco programme, the Wensum Catchment Partnership has built a system that turns citizen science into real-time catchment intelligence. It's a very quick overview of the core system. If anybody wants to talk about the technical side, please do get in touch. But citizen scientists are trained to collect structured observations using Survey 123 in the field. That data is immediately available through ArcGIS online dashboards and web apps, where we can view, share, and act on it. If the citizen scientists report a pollution event, the app sends the information directly to the local land and water team with a PDF of the water quality results, a map, and the photographs. And it works because of trust. Trust in the people collecting the data, trust in the system, and trust from the regulators to act on it. From the very outset, we've worked to validate our methods by comparing citizen science samples directly with independent lab analysis. This is an example on the left for phosphate from one of our first validation studies, but there have been many. The results show that very positive correlation between the citizen science results and the UEA results for the independent lab. This gives us confidence this isn't just engagement data, but it's decision grade information. I'd now like to highlight 3 case studies from our data set of over 4,000 surveys. Each survey equates to 30 pieces of information, giving us approximately 120,000 pieces of data about the Wensum catchment. So we're going to cover the TAT, where citizen science observations helped us to identify phosphate pressures. On the TUD, distributed monitoring shows the spatial variation missed by a single downstream site, and fixed point photography helps evidence the impact of roadworks. But the key shift in what we're doing is that patterns are now visible across the catchment and not just at fixed locations. The first catchment example is phosphate pollution. This is a site, this is our dashboard or one of them. This is a site in the headwaters of the Wensum. The citizen scientist monitoring reported repeatedly high values, which you can see on the graph. The peak was logged with the Environment Agency as a pollution incident, and the EA sent letters to all the properties nearby about how to maintain a septic tank. Following that visit, following that intervention, we saw the levels reduce. We then saw nutrient levels rise again, but this occasion we could check the record and we could see that this was actually due to drought and not due to increased phosphate. It was simply due that there was no flow in the river. So on to the second insight, the Tud catchment. This is another tributary of the Wensum, and it's a tributary which only has one testing point by the EA at the very bottom of the catchment. Now, as a point to note, the EA mean of this site for phosphate is 0.16, exactly the same as the citizen scientist 12-month average at that site. There's also only one riverfly testing site at the bottom. But for us to improve water quality, secure investment and design interventions, we needed to understand more about what was happening in this catchment. And we could see from our data that there's actually a serious pollution event happening in the headwaters that we wouldn't have picked up otherwise. We can also see the impact of the water quality from the sewage treatment works. Our final example is fixed point photography. Now, our citizen scientists are asked as part of their protocol to take a photograph. I'm just going to nip back one there actually. This is a road upgrade for the A47, and it runs almost the entire length of the Tud catchment, 9 kilometres. And what we've seen is an increase in the sediment that's in the river, on the riverbed and suspended. So using our tool, we can zoom into a specific site, and using the tool on the left, we can scroll back and look at the data, the photographs on how this has occurred over time and where we're getting data in. And this has led to people with the Highways Agency, the EA visiting, and Highways Agency having to change the way that they're clearing out drains or moving sediment around the catchment. So what's next? Well, after a request from the Environment Agency, we've been asked to introduce standardised flow monitoring, and the aim of that is to capture the real impact of abstraction and climate change on river resilience. We're going to visualise this in Arc Online as a live spatial picture, and we're going to include historic weather data as well so that we can get a better understanding of what's happening. This project has been a truly collaborative effort, and I'd like to take a minute to thank my colleagues Elle Claiborne, John Findlay and Steve Lane, who have worked with me on this.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Sarah. That's been really good to see a flavour of how data is making a difference on the ground. If I could now invite all of the panellists to turn their cameras back on, we're going to have bit of a panel discussion, and we will save some time towards the end for the questions. If I can remind people, please put your questions in the Q&A function, not in the chat, because they might be missed there. Right, thank you everybody. So I'm gonna ask a few questions to begin with, just to start to explore some of the issues that we see around the use of data and evidence to inform what we're doing. Sarah certainly touched on it in her talk then, but the first question I want to ask everybody really is, how important is it that you and your partners can trust the data that you use for informing delivery decisions? You know, whether that's data that you're sharing with the regulator, with the water industry, farmers and landowners, funders or other stakeholders. And could you say a bit about how you've worked to improve the trust in the data that you either gather and collect or share and use? Yeah, just expand on that a bit. And I might take it in the order that people spoke first. So Heather, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, so we've been working on the NBS database has evolved from the Natural Flood Management Hub, which is another platform that we've worked on, and Michelle's worked on since about 2016. And in terms of the data and working with people to trust the data and how they gather and collect and share it, firstly, we find that having too many, we try and keep it as simple as possible. So we only have the right amount, well, the amount of fields, so that's the data that's stored there, the information for each intervention, we try and have the minimum number of fields within that for information that we can, in order to keep it simple, because what we found is that people tend to they won't fill out all of the information anyway. So it's actually just keeping the core things. So like the key things would be the location, date, so we can actually look at when that data was added and how relevant it is, how up to date. Photos, because that gives us evidence of actually what's there on the ground. And I think then what we've tried to do is allow users to take ownership of their own data and keep it updated. And that allows them to have trust in the system themselves, and the users that come to see the data that has been put into the platform can then make their own decisions on the quality of what's in there by looking at the organisations and when the date was, and actually making that kind of assessment. We have, when we've used the data for analysis, we will do some quality checking and just make sure that the values sound sensible, because there is a human error. And also in the way that users input their data, we have some kind of controls in the form. So it will warn you, for example, if you're drawing like too large an area for your intervention, and it will ask you questions about whether you actually mean to be mapping such a large intervention. So there are checks through the data and then also afterwards. So I think that's how we've tried to do it. And it's been an iterative approach with different organisations over the years.
Thanks, Heather. And yeah, what you touched on in your talk as well about having that kite mark almost on the database, so people know if they're putting it into different hubs, it's going into that standardized database that everyone's sort of brought into. I think that's really important as well. Thank you. Lucy, do you want to talk a bit about trust in data, and how do you get your partners that you're trying to sort of influence and engage with data to trust it? What sort of things are you working on in that sphere?
I think in my personal case, developing nature-based solution projects on the ground, it's less about the data we're sharing, but more important about understanding the limitations of data that we're using in the modelling and in the desk studies. So that might be like the resolution, say with the LiDAR data, that's 1 metre resolution. And if that's being used to calculate how much water might be retained, you really need to understand what the limitations on accuracy are, because it's only coming at 1 metre resolution. Or if we're doing a desk assessment and using, say, SSI boundaries or country stewardship boundaries or land use things, these are all changing and regularly updating. So making sure you've got up-to-date data sets to make sure they're accurate. And hopefully looking to the future, we're just going to see more and more high accuracy open data coming out, whether that's sort of BGS mapping, geological data, just looking at making sure any data you're using for desk-based assessments is accurate and you understand who made it, what it was made for, and that your use is sort of a relevant use case for that. So like the desk-based studies help, and that data is important and it saves resources and it speeds up the design process. But at the end of the day, in terms of project design on the ground, like that, those ground truthing surveys, ground-based data and site visits are always going to be essential. And you'll often find a lot of the desk-based stuff is almost unimportant in terms of the work on the ground, and discussions with landowners will always sort of outweigh any information you can get from the modelling and that desk-based assessment.
Yeah, it's we have a sort of mantra that when you're using models and decision support tools, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So you've got to go into this with a really clear knowledge of what the uncertainties and assumptions are in our models, in our tools, in our data sets. And I think that's really important for building confidence with your stakeholders. Like you say, you've got to get out on the ground and get your wellies on at some point and build the relationships, and to be able to show the sort of maps and data that we have, but to be able to explain where the uncertainties are. I think that's really powerful in building trust, and not just saying this is the answer, you've got to trust it. Yeah. Thank you. Rachel, do you want to touch on that? And yeah, you obviously in your case study were looking at lots of different tiers of information, and you guys have a lot of expertise in your consultancy, but how do you really sort of build that trust with the partners you're trying to influence, and really sort of engage people in understanding and trusting the data?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, it's fundamental, obviously, that we have, robust data that we can use, mainly so that we can make best use of the available resources that we have. So we don't really look to collect data that we don't need. We're very focused on what we do. It informs all our decision making, our credibility with our stakeholders. We're working with councils, other landowners, members of the public, friends groups. There's a huge number of people that we need to be able to communicate the data to. And so it has to be robust, but we also have to be able to communicate in that way that all those different kind of groups can understand. And so being able to show the impact of what we do is so important. That baseline data is absolutely essential to say that this intervention has worked. We obviously work with citizen scientists a lot, because we have a lot of volunteers to help us do a lot of these kind of survey programs. And so I think that helps, because a lot of them are national schemes. So people find that that has a validation in itself. There's a lot of checks kind of in processes that go through that as well. So for example, water ranges, when you're inputting, kind of measurements you've taken from the water samples into that, if you put something in that isn't correct, one of our volunteers, for example, it will flag that up to us. So that's really helpful. It gives that check kind of stage to it. But also, we've invested a lot in digital systems, training different groups of people on kind of what they're interested in doing and how to collect data. But also we have our own kind of internal checks for data as well. So everything that we produce, we will go through to make sure that it's been validated. And the methodologies of what we're using as well are all recorded down, so that they're really transparent, because teams change over time, and you want to be able to replicate this kind of data for these sort of projects in 3, 5 and 10 years time. And if people don't know what we've done at those stages because staff have moved on and that kind of thing, it's really important that all that information is documented, so that they can show that this project is still benefiting much further down the line.
Yeah, that's a really key point, isn't it, around, because we do see a lot of, movement of staff, and that institutional memory can be lost. And if we don't get stuff written down, it can seem really, overkill at the time, because we know what we've done and, we've got a report and so on. But documenting things, having really good standardized protocols that we know people have followed, quality assuring the data that's collected, and validating it as at time of input, all of those really critical. Sarah, you talked a lot about trust in your presentation. I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to sort of emphasize and draw out. I mean, on the Anglian demo for Casco, you obviously focused a lot on this and made some really good progress, as we heard. But I wonder if you can say anything about how we might be able to replicate that around the country. Not everyone has a sort of a demo catchment under the Cascade project. So how can we build trust across the country, particularly in citizen science, as we've seen, to have the sort of impact that you've seen over there? Oh, I think you're on mute, Sarah.
Every time. I took this question to our citizen science coordinator today, because I said, where do we stand on this? And her response was, trust is fundamental, because if they don't trust it, they don't act on it. Especially when we want it to be used in those delivery decisions. But if you're involving funding or prioritization or regulatory pressure, nobody's going to use it otherwise if they can't trust it. What we found is that there is that assumption that volunteer collected data is automatically lower quality. So we've done an awful lot of work on building confidence, not just through validation, but also transparency. We've done that in a few ways with the standardized method you referred to, that training, the support for volunteers. We do QA checks on our data, which the dashboard has really helped us with, because we can see those suddenly anomalous results and then get into why it may have happened. But we also are open about it. So when people can see where the data's come from, what the limitations might be, what its lineage is, they're more willing to use it appropriately. And we've built a metadata statement which is available alongside our data. So to download our data, you need to look at the metadata statement, which explains the different tiers. It explains how it's been collected, how we've enhanced our collection. But I think in terms of repeating it across other areas, that is where the standards come on, and make sure that it's fit for purpose. So your catchment monitoring plan, thinking about collecting the data that you need to build your evidence for what changes you want to have in your catchment.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, the word metadata probably excites us data geeks, but it sounds very boring to everyone else. But it's really important, isn't it? It's how we encode, you know, the quality of the data and the purpose it was collected for. That came up a bit in the questions in the last session as well. We've got to be able to understand if this data was collected for this purpose, it may not be suitable to make these decisions over here. And that's where the sort of standardization of data systems and data models comes in. Because if you're reinventing those kind of tags and quality stamps over and over again, nobody's going to understand it. So we've got to work nationally to standardize some of this stuff. Okay, next question then. So we've touched a lot on the need for quality and rigor and integrity of data so that we can trust it. But there is a temptation to kind of keep adding complexity to this picture and to demand higher and higher standards, and particularly when it comes to citizen science, that will create a barrier in terms of usability for the people who are collecting or processing or entering this data. So, I mean, how do we balance those two things, that we need to improve the quality, but that we need to make sure that our data systems are still usable, whether that's staff or volunteers or partners that are both collecting this and sharing it, but also trying to interpret and understand it? Who wants to tackle that one first? I don't know, Sarah, do you want to, as you're already live?
Well now, I think that's possibly one of the biggest challenges in environmental data, specifically around volunteer geographic information. So how do we do it? Because we can build an incredibly rigorous system, but the volunteers can't use it, or it's overwhelming, or the partners can't interpret the outputs, it's not actually going to achieve anything. So the way we looked at it was we decided that we wanted to, rather than expect everybody to be GIS specialists or technical experts or data analysts, we've tried to present the information in ways that are intuitive. So live dashboards, simple interfaces, clear visualizations. And we've made as much as possible the app intelligent, so it reduces the amount of technological knowledge the volunteer has to have to use it. So we use the phrase small screen cold fingers to think about how many times do they need to click on the screen to be able to enter a sample. Because volunteers contribute because they care about the rivers and not because they want to learn how to use an app. So we have to create systems that support participation and not create barriers to participation. So I think each system is different, but we just need to keep users in mind.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love it. Small screen, cold fingers. I'm going to use that as a good metric in future. Thanks, Sarah. Heather, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I think just to build on that point, I think from our work on the NFM hub and the NBS hub, what I would say is that it's quite important to try and incentivize the users to also, with features that make them want to also put the data in, not just because they're ticking a box and it's a box ticking exercise for funding, but that they can return and actually perhaps have dashboards that they're sharing with stakeholders. So, or be able to create their own maps in there, or be able to export that data. Maybe they also want to have it in a spreadsheet, because we can have all these complex things, but people still need to be able to get their data out, and they might want to do that. So having features in there that, as Sarah said, it's really thinking about the users and trying to make sure that it's as easy as possible for them to use, and we reduce the barrier. So in that way as well, it would be that it's free, have a platform that's free. You don't want to be having to pay to sign up to something. But I'll pass on to someone else then.
Thanks, Heather. And I think that's a really important point, that we kind of collect the data once and reuse it in multiple ways. We obviously do a lot with ArcGIS in the Rivers Trust, and it's a really good flexible platform in that we can collect the data in the NFM hub or the NBS database and reuse it in catchment story maps. So we're not putting the onus on those delivery organisations to enter their data into multiple places. I think that's really critical. Rachel.
Yes, I want to just add to both of what you've just said, that I think it's knowing the group that you're working with as well when it comes to kind of volunteers and citizen scientists. So we have quite a lot of different monitoring schemes that different people are involved with. Our Smart Rivers group, which is probably the highest level of citizen science that you can have, are actually a group of scientists doing it. And obviously they were very happy to kind of be trained into that kind of high level species ID for freshwater invertebrates, whereas not everybody wants to do that or have the pressure to do that, and we're happy to do kind of other kind of surveys and things like on butterflies and that kind of thing. So I think knowing who you're working with is really important for a success of a project, and also feeding back as well. So people put an awful lot of their free time into these kind of things. They want to know it's having an impact. So having really good training, checking in with people, and then also, at the end of the season or the end of the year, showing how that information is actually being used on the ground to inform future conservation interventions, is really important as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think, being user focused is something we really try and be with some of the systems that we're developing, but it can be tricky to do, to do proper user-centered design of, systems, whether it's for data capture or a data sharing and interpretation. It takes a lot of time and research, and there's whole sort of, sectors of expertise out there that can help with that. But I think keeping people front and center of your design process when you're designing your monitoring scheme or your data system is really critical. Thank you. Any other comments, or we'll move on to the next question? So the next thing I wanted to explore, I know Carrie touched on this earlier in the last session as well, that we can never have perfect data. We're never going to have a complete picture to inform our decisions. We'll always want more and better. But one of the sort of other go-to mantras we have in our organisation is you need enough data to convince your stakeholders to work with you. So what do we think are the other factors that are also important in that picture to really drive evidence-led decision making, but in the face of uncertainty? Don't know if anyone wants to pick that one up. Lucy, you've put your hand up.
I mean, it just makes you think about how much we've been thinking about the role of relationship-led versus model-led decision making. Because we have this modelling tool that it gives us lots of evidence and it helps strengthen project proposals and support discussion and say, oh, you're likely to get these risks, these benefits if we do work in this area. And that does build confidence because people like seeing data behind things and having a bit more confidence they're doing something at a big picture level. But realistically progressing projects on the ground, the biggest factor in making any decision is landowner interest and willingness, which is where, as a river trust working on the ground, we have sort of a key role to play doing that sort of interpersonal relationships. And you can spend a long time mapping and modelling, but if you don't have those relationships on the ground, if you don't have people willing and interested in doing projects, they're never going to be delivered on the ground. So yeah, using modelling to streamline projects, but having flexibility in choosing your priority areas, taking account of local insights, landowner relationships, and those one-to-one discussions, those sort of long-term relationships built up as organisations and as individuals within an organisation, and getting trust in the area, it's absolutely key to achieving the environmental aims alongside data.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, it touches back on what we were talking earlier about trust, doesn't it? You invest in reliable data, but you've got to build that interpersonal relationship, and to be able to explain the uncertainties in our data and the gaps in our data as well helps with that relationship building. And what you touched on there about the being there for the long term, I think that's something that, you know, the Rivers Trust movement really does. We're kind of on the ground, and, you know, many of the staff that work in our movement have been around for a very long time and built that kind of long-term view and the long-term relationships that are needed. And it can be really challenging when we're trying to work with organisations with a rapid turnover. You've got to continually rebuild that, haven't you? Rachel, did you want to come in?
Yes, so I think recognising the limitations of the data is really important. You know, in urban areas in particular, work in very complex and changing environments, and you know, being honest about that and saying what those challenges are really helps, because then it doesn't look like you're kind of ignoring those issues that might be there. I mean, I'm a big fan, as you've probably seen, of using multiple sources of data, because even if some can't, you know, have limitations, if you're saying the same picture, taking multiple different types of data sets, then you're building the confidence in that overall kind of picture that you're trying to get across, and replicating your data sets as well, you know, taking kind of single point water quality samples, that gives you an indication, okay, something's going on here and we need to look further into it, but you need to do far more robust work than just that. So that's also really important. Being able to say, I've repeated this every week or every day, or, you know, whatever is necessary, I think really helps also to give confidence to that data.
Yeah, and something we've been really advocating on Casco is using weight of evidence approaches. So, you know, really kind of looking at how you can formally assess individual bits of evidence, but you start with a hypothesis or a question in mind so that you've got something to test it against. And it may be that some bits of evidence support that hypothesis, some refute it. But if you can come together collaboratively with your stakeholders to review that, and the challenge there is how you can simplify things enough that everyone can assess it and understand it. But we've seen, you know, how those approaches can really work to give confidence really in, you know, what is a risky decision-making environment. We're not got perfect data. We've got to build our collaborative confidence that what we're doing is, you know, the best solution based on the current evidence. And then as we measure improvement, we've got to go back round and adapt that and say, well, actually, we discovered, you know, maybe we were wrong. We need to change our future investments. Sarah, did you want to come in?
I was just going to add to that around making sure that the data is not that you understand the different data sets, because we've recently carried out a process whereby we're building some opportunity models, and it became evident that the geographical science of understanding bias across spatial analysis was starting to come into play. So we'd included both the slope data set and the flow pathway data set. And it was very evident as soon as I saw that we were going to be double counting, we were going to be over replicating certain things. So I think not overcomplicating your model, understanding the limitations of the data that's gone into a model or your data sets, making sure things like resolution, currency, accuracy, and then sense checking it and putting the on the ground local knowledge on the same, finding a way to combine that with the data that you're getting out of your model early on in the process, and not being afraid to say this data set doesn't work for us. This data set is just too inaccurate. We've just got too much indecision about it. We're going to scrap it.
Yeah, that's really important, you know, the ability to kind of draw a boundary and say this is not good enough, we're going to have to leave it home. And the temptation always is to take everything, isn't it, because we've got so little data. But I think being able to set some standards and say, you know, below this we can't support this type of decision. And again, you know, that's something we work quite hard on in Casco, to identify different purposes for different tiers of types of monitoring. So I really recommend people have a look there. Okay, we are going to move on. I'm just going to ask one last question before we move on to some of the audience Q&A. And I always like in these kind of discussions to give people a magic wand, which you can basically use to fix the first big problem that you would tackle. If you can identify what's the first thing that you would change that would open up the most progress, and, you know, be unbounded by where we are now. Let's think about what it is that would really change things the most. And I think it would be great for anyone listening who is shaping our sort of future policy and data and evidence landscape to be thinking big, really, and thinking about the future. You know, there's a lot coming at us from AI tools and massive big data sets, but also, you know, some of the sort of policy landscape that's changing. So I might go in the order that we had people at the beginning. So Heather, with your magic wand, what's the first thing that you would fix to really make progress?
Yeah, if we had a magic wand, it would be for the project I've been working on, it would be the the way we handle users and groups of users on our platform. And I think that would require us to have a more bespoke software potentially than what we're using. So currently the solution isn't ideal, but it's something that if we could do it tomorrow, we would yeah, it would be brilliant. And I think the other thing that I would say around that is I think with AI and any kind of new innovations, they can be really exciting and you know offer a lot of progress. But actually, I just think, as others have said, we need to be a bit careful about how perhaps we're integrating them and maybe not get caught up in buzzwords and make sure we're not losing like the core features that we have there, because sometimes things can be redesigned in a what seems like a brilliant new way, and then you go and try and get the data, for example, off a platform and find that you can't access what you used to be able to previously. And there are examples of that. So I think that that's what I would say, and I'll pass on. Not sure who's next, but yeah.
Thanks, Heather. And yeah, I think we've seen a lot of claims of AI helping, but like we said earlier, you've got to understand the limitations of those tools in order to engage your stakeholders. So, you know, there's a lot of warnings and work that we need to do around that. Lucy, you're up next. What would you do with your magic wand?
Definitely builds on Heather's work of sharing our data and sharing while we're doing work, and that push to make our data free, open, and accessible, as it really drives decisions of where we can deliver work. When we understand where work's being delivered, and we can be much more effective doing catchment scale work. Obviously, the key issue is balancing that with the need of privacy and data protection. There is a real challenge when you're working with landowners and farmers who might be reticent to draw attention to their land or have their own privacy concerns, and balancing those two factors is a very hard line to tread. And then the other part is just encouraging a shift to open source tools where we can, to foster collaboration and drive development in that field. And just excited to see as we get more nature-based solution work users doing things such as developing QGIS tools, where that will lead.
Thank you. Well, I might come back to you in a bit about open source because there is a question in the chat about that, but thank you. Rachel.
I think with my background being in academia, what I'd really love to see is a much more of an increased collaboration, particularly, you know, now that I work at a conservation charity, between those kind of groups, NGOs and universities. Been to a lot of conferences over the last year, and there's still quite a big void, I feel, between the two on thinking about kind of academic concepts and how things actually work on the ground. Being able to access data is also quite difficult. You know, research is behind paywalls. A lot of research that happens in universities doesn't necessarily publish that's available to access for us to use it. So that, I think, would make an enormous difference. We can really help each other out. And there are some great examples of it, but I wouldn't say that it's widespread.
Yeah, and definitely, you know, that's where open data and open source software and things like that come into play, because certainly what we found working with the catchment-based approach partnerships is, you know, like earlier someone referenced the soils data that's been opened up. Yes, it has, but you've still got to have a login to that system. So we can't pull that data onto a catchment portal that all partners can look at with other data sets, for example. So, you know, there's open and then there's open, isn't there? And I think that's a really important recipe in that mix. Thank you. Sarah, if I can come on to you. What
Well,
are
I think everybody's said what I was going to say. I mean, I think I would use it to break down the technical and cultural barriers around sharing and using citizen science data, because we have, it was interesting when you said, we don't have enough environmental data. I think we have a lot of environmental data, and I think it's sometimes very hard to know what environmental data to use to represent what you're trying to make decisions about. But we have lots of data being collected by communities and researchers and regulators, but it all sits in disconnected systems and it's not treated equally as evidence. It's really hard to get hold of some of the most interesting data that we want to be able to use for evidence, like the WIMS data doesn't come out spatially and you've got to really play with it and know what you're doing. So if I had a magic wand, I would create a genuinely connected and interoperable evidence system where trusted citizen science data, which has been collected to a certain standard, can flow more easily into decision making and be seen alongside regulatory, academic and operational data sets equally. So I think that would make a big difference to delivery.
Excellent. And yeah, that's exactly what we've been working towards on Casco, isn't it? And what we've sort of set out in that 10-year roadmap is really being able to join everything up at that granular level. But you also need to invest in the capacity in catchments and regions. Hopefully those regional systems planner functions are going to incorporate those kind of roles that can really help to interpret and understand and analyse and take those weight of evidence approaches with all that joined up data. So let's hope our magic wands are going to really come true over the next 5 years as we see a different system rolled out. Brilliant. Okay, well, we've got 10 minutes left, just under. So I am going to have a look now at some of the Q&As in the chat. What I might do, I know, Heather, you have answered a couple of the ones on the NBS Hub, but I might invite you just to answer those couple of queries verbally, if that's okay with you, about how the NBS database and hub relates to existing resources like the NFM hub, the RRC inventory, and other data sets that other organisations are collecting. So could you maybe answer that one?
Yeah, okay. I'm just getting those questions up, but one of the questions was, how does NBS mapping and restoration relate or link to the existing RRC inventory and the EA? Sorry about all these acronyms. Can you just
the NFM hub? So it was the
NFM hub. So I guess all these different databases. The NBS database has actually evolved from the NFM hub and database, which was a platform that we've been using since about 2016 or 2017. So the NBS hub, which we showed you in that talk, is actually the same. They share the same data model. The data is stored in the same place as the NFM hub as it is in the NBS hub. And it's the same database or model used by the Environment Agency for the Natural Flood Management Programme that runs till 2027, I believe. So the answer to how the data layer relates to the existing RR, can you just explain that acronym, Michelle? Because I'm struggling with this.
The River Restoration Centre. They
River Restoration
database of projects.
Yeah, so it's a separate layer to that inventory, and we have in the past had a meeting actually maybe last year to look at that, but it's not something that is currently there to merge them or anything like that. They're two separate.
Yeah. And I think the RRC project database isn't down to the same granular level because we record sort of individual assets, don't we, in the NBS hub? So sort of individual, leaky dam and things like that. So they do sort of meet at different tiers, but it touches on that need to join things up. We should make sure that any project data available in our hub and in the RRC database can speak to each other, and that's where building on sort of open data systems and APIs can really help us in the future. Thank you. And did you want to just quickly touch on the question on how you keep the database updated when things might get washed away and so on?
Yeah, definitely. So that was another question. And the NBS hub and also the NFM hub have an app for inspections. So it's an app that you download to a mobile phone or a tablet, and users would go out into the field to the assets. For the NFM programme funding for the Environment Agency, they're mandated to go after each named storm event or at 6 monthly intervals, I believe. But in the case of any other users, they might just go at an interval they decide, and they go out and take photographs of the intervention. So that might be a leaky barrier or tree planting or some soil measures that have been introduced. And they comment on the condition of that intervention or asset. And then what that does is it builds a repeat picture of what's going on at that site. And that information is visible in the hub. So on the hub, there's a national map of all of the interventions around the country. And if you click on each intervention, so they're the colourful dots, there's a pop-up, and at the bottom of that pop-up, you'll see if there is an inspection, it will appear there. And there are some, it's quite a new feature, but there are some organisations that have started doing that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, Lucy, I'm going to tackle one of the questions that you've been asked. So Kit's asked if you could talk more about your use of open source software, QGIS, and the pros and cons compared to Esri tools, which are often expensive. So can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so in the last 6 months, we've had a few discussions as a trust about ArcGIS versus QGIS. QGIS is the most commonly GIS tool used in Europe, so it's got a very large community of users. It's open source and developed by users, so from a principal point of view, that's beneficial over Esri tools, which are proprietary. And that strong community there's a very strong community support base. So online, there's a lot of assistance with answering any questions. And also it has a modular design, so you can get functionality by putting in more plugins which are made by community users. And it's very easy to search up if you've got a question that needs answering, to search up if there's a relevant plugin. So the reason we decided to move was that QGIS generally runs faster, particularly for small projects. With big projects, your computer will become the limiting factor, but that's the case with any GIS software. QGIS projects are generally smaller than ArcGIS projects, so easier to store on your computer. There's no multi-factor authentication, which can just be a big right pain when you're trying to get on to show something quickly. It's also more commonly taught at university, and anyone beginning in GIS these days has probably started with QGIS because it's free. They can get it, they can try it at home, they can use it themselves. More data formats are accepted, so you can do more things with it. And also we're saving rather a lot of money by doing that. We do, in fact, we still have the ArcGIS license to the trust, which it does have its uses, and obviously every tool has things that they're particularly good at. So ArcGIS is that integrated online, offline system. So story maps are great. ArcGIS Online is really useful if you want to share, although we have problems with a limited credit system. And it's better for some processing tools, some hydrogeology tools. It's slightly better at as of yet. But the thing I love about QGIS is there's always people developing it, so you never know when a tool that will give that compatibility will come out.
Thanks.
And yeah,
that's really good. I'm sure most of us who use GIS can find lots of pros and cons in both. It's really important to weigh them up. We're nearly out of time, so I'm just going to pick one question now that I'm hoping Sarah can pick up. Mike has asked, is there a good supply of citizen scientists, and how are they trained in water safety and technical diligence?
Well, I do wish my volunteer coordinator was here, because she would be able to answer this in great detail, and I would be happy to pass on her details if somebody is very much interested in knowing more. All of the citizen scientist points that we measure from are already risk assessed before any citizen scientist goes near them. We have certain parameters that we look for in terms of good access, safe access, clear parking, no dangerous roads nearby, and that does limit some of the sites we'd love to test at, but we can't genuinely let anybody go out to. We also tend to stick to public access, so we don't have places where we go and we need permission. they are trained in how to approach the water. They're trained in how to sample. At no point do they enter the water. They sample from a bridge or a point that's nearby. And in terms of the technical diligence, we have systems built into our database app that allow us to know who logged the data and also which kit was used. So if we start to get erroneous results when we do our QC checks, of which we do quite a few, we can see whether it's a training situation, so somebody just keeps putting the wrong value in, or whether their kit may need recalibrating. All of the volunteers are checked on regularly, but we also have certain things built in, so they can't enter 9.99 if it only goes up to the limit of 1. So we have quite a few systems built in, but as I say, that's the important role of the volunteer coordinator, to look after them all and make sure that due diligence is carried out.
Absolutely, and to make sure that they're sort of retained and motivated as well.
Yes, there is a good supply, but that depends on the river you're sampling, because some of our rivers are very, very hidden and a long way from anybody, and other ones have got huge populations with lots of phosphate. So it depends on the catchment.
It does, and it's that's one of the challenges, is trying to get consistent coverage everywhere. But all right, well, we are out of time, so I've overrun by a minute. I'm sure Becca will tell me off, but thank you so much, everybody, for your contributions to this session. I think it's been a really good discussion, and we've got a really good flavour of how many ways that data and evidence is driving delivery, and we just want to see more of it and faster, really. Thanks very much, everyone. Back to you, Becca.
Thanks, Michelle, and to everyone for another really, really good session. I hope that satisfied all the data enthusiasts that I know are out there, but also if it's not your normal area of work, I hope that you did find that interesting and informative. We are now heading to our lunch break. We've made it through the morning, and we'll be returning here at 1:45 for our second keynote of the day from Marianne O'Hotter, which in my opinion is not to be missed. So just under an hour, come back to the lobby and join session number 3. But in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful lunch, maybe a chance to get outside and catch some fresh air. We will see you soon.